Hi, fifth grade. I'm going to try a different approach with Read Aloud as I want you to actually see the text as I read the text. I'm going to start a journey through Percy Jackson and the Olympians. It's by Rick Riordan. It is the first of a series, and I will tell you if you like one, you'll like them all. I have permission from Disney Publishing Worldwide to read this book and to post it so you can listen to it. I'm going to post it on our private, on my YouTube page, and then I'll have to take it down by June 30th, but I just want you to be aware. Um, I want you to take a look at the cover. The cover is actually, this is a different version of it, but it's really amazing to see just a little kid. It looks like water, and if you've seen the movie, you think you know the story, but you really, really don't. Rick Riordan's written a ton of books. This is just one of his series if you're interested. This is our table of contents, as we know in the beginning of the book, and his dedication to Haley, who heard the story first. But I'm going to go ahead and before I read, I want you to think. Think about a field trip that you've been on. Think about one that you really enjoyed. I'm going to give you just a second. Now, as I read this to you, I will stop and ask questions, and you obviously can't respond to me, but you could journal it down, and I'm going to be posting story questions on my Google Classroom. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Chapter 1, I accidentally vaporized my pre-algebra teacher. Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. If you're reading this because you think you might be one, my advice is close this book right now. Believe whatever lie your mom or dad told you about your birth and try to lead a normal life. Being a half-blood is dangerous. It's scary. Most of the time, it gets you killed in painful, nasty ways. If you're a normal kid reading this because you think it's fiction, great, read on. I envy you for being able to believe that none of this ever happened. But if you recognize yourself in these pages, if you feel something stirring inside, stop reading immediately. You might be one of us. And once you know that, it's only a matter of time before they sense it too. And they'll come for you. Don't say I didn't warn you. Guys, I want to pull a quick thing to your attention, and that is the very first part of this. We talk about point of view in a fiction story. There's your first person, second person, and third person. First person is the I, me, we, us. Third person is where like it's an outside person telling the story about someone. Well, second person is kind of where the story involves the reader. So when Percy starts talking to you, the reader, that is an example, a really good example of second person narration. All right, here we go. My name is Percy Jackson. I'm 12 years old. Until a few months ago, I was a boarding student at Yancey Academy, a private school for troubled kids in upstate New York. Am I a troubled kid? Yeah, you could say that. I could start at any point in my short, miserable life to prove it, but things really started going bad last May when our sixth grade class took a field trip to Manhattan. 28 mental case kids and 2 teachers on a yellow school bus heading to the Metropolitan Museum of Art to look at ancient Greek and Roman stuff. I know, it sounds like torture. Most Yancey field trips were. But Mr. Brunner, our Latin teacher, was leading this trip, so I had high hopes. Mr. Brunner was this middle-aged guy in a motorized wheelchair. He had thinning hair and a scruffy beard and a frayed tweed jacket, which always smelled like coffee. You wouldn't think he'd be cool, but he told stories and jokes and let us play games in class. He also had this awesome collection of Roman armor and weapons, so he was the only teacher whose class didn't put me to sleep. I hoped the trip would be okay. At least I hoped that for once I wouldn't get in trouble. Hey guys, does that sound suspiciously like foreshadowing? When the person in the story is like, I hope at least for once I wouldn't get in trouble. What do you know is coming? We got trouble coming, kids. Boy, was I wrong. There you go. See, bad things happen to me on field trips. Like at my 5th grade school when we went to the Saratoga battlefield. I had this accident with a Revolutionary War cannon. I wasn't aiming for the school bus, but of course I got expelled anyway. And before that, at my fourth grade school, when we took a behind the scenes tour of the Marine World Shark Pool, I sort of hit the wrong lever on the catwalk, and our class took an unplanned swim. And the time before that, well, you get the idea. This trip, I was determined to be good. All the way into the city, I put up with Nancy Bobofit, a freckly, red-headed, kleptomaniac girl, hitting my best friend Grover in the back of the head with chunks of peanut butter and ketchup sandwich. Grover was an easy target. He was scrawny. He cried when he got frustrated. He must have been held back several grades because he was the only sixth grader with acne and the start of a wispy beard on his chin. On top of all that, he was crippled. He had a note excusing him from PE for the rest of his life because he had some kind of muscular disease in his legs. He walked funny, like every step hurt him. Don't let that fool you. Guys, I'm making a connection as I read this, and I'm thinking about our story that we read, Out of My Mind, with Melody. Even though she was in a wheelchair and couldn't speak, I think about the kid who's the easy target and the one who kind of struggles in life, and that's a text-to-text connection I have as I read this. So he walked funny, like every step hurt him, but don't let that fool you. You should have seen him run when it was enchilada day in the cafeteria. Anyway, Nancy Bobofit was throwing wads of sandwich that stuck in his curly brown hair, and she knew I couldn't do anything back to her because I was already on probation. The headmaster had threatened me with death by in-school suspension if anything bad, embarrassing, or even mildly entertaining happened on this trip. I'm going to kill her, I mumbled. Grover tried to calm me down. It's okay. I like peanut butter. He dodged another piece of Nancy's lunch. That's it. I started to get up, but Grover pulled me back to my seat. You're already on probation, he reminded me. You know who'll get blamed if anything happens. Looking back on it, I wish I'd decked Nancy Bobofit right then and there. In-school suspension would have been nothing compared to the mess I was about to get myself into. Mr. Brunner led the museum tour. He rode up front in his wheelchair, guiding us through the big echoey galleries, past marble statues and glass cases full of really old black and orange pottery. It blew my mind that this stuff had survived for 2,000, 3,000 years. He gathered us around a 13-foot tall stone column with a big sphinx on the top and started telling us how it was a grave marker, a stele for a girl about our age. He told us about the carvings on the sides. I was trying to listen to what he had to say because it was kind of interesting, but everybody around me was talking, and every time I told them to shut up, the other teacher chaperone, Mrs. Dodds, would give me the evil eye. Mrs. Dodds was this little math teacher from Georgia who always wore a black leather jacket, even though she was 50 years old. She looked mean enough to ride a Harley right into your locker. She'd come to Yancey halfway through the year when our last math teacher had a nervous breakdown. From her first day, Mrs. Dodds loved Nancy Bobofit and figured I was devil spawn. She would point her crooked finger at me and say, "Now, honey," real sweet, and I knew I was going to get after-school detention for a month. One time after she made me erase answers out of old math workbooks until midnight, I told Grover I didn't think Mrs. Dodds was human. He looked at me real serious and said, "You're absolutely right." Mr. Brunner kept talking about Greek funeral art. Finally, Nancy Bobofit snickered, something about the naked guy on the stele, and I turned around and said, "Will you shut up?" It came out louder than I meant it to. The whole group laughed. Mr. Brunner stopped his story. "Mr. Jackson," he said, "did you have a comment?" My face was totally red. I said, "No, sir." Mr. Brunner pointed to one of the pictures on the stele. "Perhaps you'll tell us what this picture represents." I looked at the carving and felt a flush of relief because I actually recognized it. That's Kronos eating his kids, right? "Yes," Mr. Brunner said, obviously not satisfied. "And he did this because—" Well, I racked my brain to remember. Kronos was the king god, and God? Mr. Brunner asked. Titan, I corrected myself. And he didn't trust his kids who were the gods, so Kronos ate them, right? But his wife hid baby Zeus and gave Kronos a rock to eat instead. And later, when Zeus grew up, he tricked his dad, Kronos, into barfing up his brothers and sisters. Ew, said one of the girls behind me. And so there was this big fight between the gods and the titans, I continued, and the gods won. Some snickers from the group. Behind me, Nancy Bobofit mumbled to a friend, like we're going to use this in real life, like it's going to say on our job applications. Please explain why Kronos ate his kids. And why, Mr. Jackson, Brunner said. To paraphrase Miss Bobofit's excellent question, does this matter in real life? Busted, Grover muttered. Shut up, Nancy hissed, her face even brighter red than her hair. At least Nancy got packed, too. Mr. Brunner was the only one who ever caught her saying anything wrong. He had radar ears. I thought about his question and shrugged. I don't know, sir. I see. Mr. Brunner looked disappointed. Well, half credit, Mr. Jackson. Zeus did indeed feed Kronos a mixture of mustard and wine, which made him disgorge his other 5 children, who, of course, being immortal gods, had been living and growing up completely undigested in the Titan's stomach. The gods defeated their father, sliced him to pieces with his own scythe, and scattered his remains in Tartarus, the darkest part of the underworld. On that happy note, it's time for lunch. Mrs. Dodds, would you lead us back outside? The class drifted off, the girls holding their stomachs, the guys pushing each other around and acting like doofuses. Grover and I were about to follow when Mr. Brunner said, Mr. Jackson? I knew what was coming. I told Grover to keep going. Then I turned toward Mr. Brunner. Sir? Mr. Brunner had this look that wouldn't let you go. Intense brown eyes that could have been 1,000 years old and had seen everything. You must learn the answer to my question, Mr. Brunner told me. About the Titans? About real life, and how your studies apply to it. Oh. What you learn from me is vitally important. I expect you to treat it as such. I will accept only the best from you, Percy Jackson. I wanted to get angry. This guy pushed me so hard. I mean, sure, it was kind of cool on tournament days when he dressed up in a suit of Roman armor and shouted, What ho! And challenged us sword point against chalk to run to the board and name every Greek and Roman person who had ever lived, and their mother and what god they worshipped. But Mr. Brunner expected me to be as good as everybody else, despite the fact that I have dyslexia and attention deficit disorder, and I had never made above a C- in my life. No, he didn't expect me to be as good. He expected me to be better. And I just couldn't learn all those names and facts, much less spell them correctly. I mumbled something about trying harder when Mr. Brunner took one long, sad look at the Stelle like he'd been at this girl's funeral. He told me to go outside and eat my lunch. The class gathered on the front steps of the museum where we could watch the foot traffic along Fifth Avenue. Overhead, a huge storm was brewing with clouds blacker than I'd ever seen over the city. More foreshadowing. I figured maybe it was global warming or something because the weather all across New York State had been weird since Christmas. We'd had massive snowstorms, flooding, wildfires from lightning strikes. I wouldn't have been surprised if this was a hurricane blowing in. Nobody else seemed to notice. Some of the guys were pelting pigeons with Lunchables crackers. Nancy Bobofit was trying to pickpocket something from a lady's purse, and, of course, Mrs. Dodds wasn't seeing a thing. Grover and I sat on the edge of the fountain away from the others. We thought that maybe if we did that, everybody wouldn't know we were from that school, the school for loser freaks who couldn't make it elsewhere. Detention? Grover asked. Nah, I said, not from Brunner. I just wish he'd lay off me sometimes. I mean, I'm not a genius. Grover didn't say anything for a while. Then when I thought he was going to give me some deep philosophical comment to make me feel better, he said, Can I have your apple? Okay, so I'm going to stop there because I want to let this sink in. This is the first part of chapter 1. I will post the second one, but in a second video. And again, there will be questions posted. These are bonus. These are not part of your regular ELA block, but these are bonus questions that will, just to see if you can find the answers and kind of a little Percy Jackson trivia. So, I hope you enjoyed part 1, chapter 1. I will be posting the second part very soon. Take care, guys.